If you enjoy this historical analysis, please consider subscribing for more deep dives into the shadows of the 20th century. The air in Arthur Vance's office at the Vienna station, located under diplomatic cover within the U.S. Embassy, was perpetually stale, tasting of radiator heat and old coffee. It was March 1976. Outside, Vienna was a city of cold Baroque neutrality, the designated gray zone where East and West met, exchanged spies on bridges, and maintained the polite fiction of diplomacy. Inside, Vance was reviewing the after-action report of Operation Cinnabar, a failure. The operation had attempted to exfiltrate a high-level defector from the Czechoslovakian Statní bezpečnost, STB, using the trunk of a diplomatic vehicle. The vehicle was stopped at the Kleinhaugsdorf crossing for a random customs inspection. The defector was found. The diplomat was declared persona non grata. The network in Prague was compromised. Vance, a man in his late 50s defined by gray suits and a profound economy of motion, closed the folder. The diplomatic pouch method was dead. The Berlin Tunnel era was long past. What the Central Intelligence Agency needed, what he needed, was a durable legend, a mechanism that could move people and materials across the Iron Curtain not in a sudden dash, but slowly, predictably, and boringly, hidden in plain sight. His eyes scanned a trade manifest on his desk, unrelated to Cinnabar. It detailed a shipment of Austrian ball bearings to a Polish tractor factory, trucks, shipping manifests, customs seals. The idea that formed was not brilliant, it was logistical. The Soviet Bloc, for all its ideological purity, needed Western trade. It needed hard currency, replacement parts, and technology it could not produce. This created traffic. Vance envisioned a proprietary, a shell company, owned and operated entirely by the agency, but appearing to be a legitimate third-rate European freight business. It wouldn't be large enough to attract ministerial attention, but busy enough to justify constant cross-border routes. He began drafting the proposal for Operation LTL, or less than load. The operational name was a trucking term, but Vance preferred the cover name he conceived for the company itself, Transadriatic Haulage, TAH. It would be based in Trieste, Italy, a perfect location. Trieste was a major port, non-aligned with historic trade routes deep into Austria, Yugoslavia, and the Danube Basin. TAH would specialize in mixed cargo runs to the Eastern Bloc, specifically Poland, the German Democratic Republic, GDR, and Czechoslovakia. The key to the operation would not be spies. It would be the drivers. They couldn't be Americans. They needed to be locals, preferably West Germans or Austrians, men who understood the routes, the borders, and the subtle art of the incentive. A pack of Kent cigarettes for a Yugoslav guard, a bottle of brandy for a Polish customs inspector. Vance found his man in Klaus Hartmann. Hartmann was 58, a West German national living near Salzburg. His file was thick. A former Wehrmacht logistician on the Eastern Front, he possessed an encyclopedic knowledge of Eastern European roads. After the war, he'd done time for smuggling before going straight as an independent driver. The agency had used him for low-level observation in the 1960s. He was hardened, cynical, motivated by money, and crucially, he was meticulous. He hated the Soviet system, but he was not an ideologue. He was a professional. The third leg of the stool was the inside man. This was the most delicate part. The operation required someone within the bloc's bureaucracy to ensure tax manifests were always approved, its cargo given low priority for inspection. That asset was Marek Rosinski, a mid-level official in the Polish Ministry of Foreign Trade based in Gdansk. Rosinski, codename Gull, had been recruited by the CIA 2 years prior. He was not a high-flying source of political secrets, but he controlled the stamps and signatures that decided which Western trucks were unloaded at the border and which were waved through. He was motivated by his children's future, disillusioned with the stagnation of the Gierek regime, and increasingly fearful of his own superiors. Vance knew Rosinski was getting nervous. Operation LTL would serve a dual purpose. It would be the primary mechanism for exfiltration, and it would also be Rosinski's own escape route when the time came. Creating Transadriatic Haulage was an exercise in bureaucratic art. It took 6 months and a significant budget routed through Langley's finance division. TA was incorporated in Trieste. The agency leased a small, dusty office above a pizzeria and a patch of gravel near the industrial port to serve as a truck yard. They purchased 2 vehicles, not new, gleaming trucks that would attract attention, but 5-year-old Berliet TR-280s, common French trucks known for their reliability and, crucially, their unremarkable appearance. Klaus Hartmann was brought to a safe house in Munich for his briefing. He was not told he was working for the CIA. He was told he was working for a consortium of Western industrialists who needed to move sensitive prototypes past Soviet industrial spies. Hartmann understood the euphemism. He was to be the managing director of TAH, as well as its primary driver. The most critical work took place in a specialized agency workshop near Frankfurt. Hartmann's primary Berliet was modified. This was not a simple false bottom. A section of the trailer's floor, just ahead of the rear axles, was removed. A compartment, nicknamed the coffin, was fabricated from insulated steel. It was approximately 2 meters long, 1 meter wide, and 1 meter high. It was designed to hold 1 adult human or a significant cache of documents. The innovation was in its access and ventilation. The coffin was accessed not from above, which would require moving cargo, but from below. A panel, disguised as part of the trailer's undercarriage chassis, could be unbolted from the outside. The ventilation was piped through the trailer's structural square tubing, exiting near the refrigeration unit's exhaust fan, masking any thermal anomaly. While the truck was being built, Hartmann began the dry runs. For 8 months, TIA operated as a legitimate, if marginally profitable, business. Hartmann drove routes from Trieste to Warsaw, from Trieste to East Berlin. He hauled Italian olives, Austrian medical supplies, and West German machine parts. He learned the border guards' names. He noted their shift changes. He cataloged which crossings were lazy, the Czech crossing at Mikulov, and which were dangerously efficient, the GDR crossing at Druitz. In Gdansk, Marek Rosinski played his part. He ensured TAH's manifests were prioritized. When a TAH truck arrived, Rosinski's paperwork ensured it was marked State Priority Goods, Low Security, directing inspectors to focus on other, less connected shipments. In Vienna, Vance watched the reports. TAH was establishing a pattern of normalcy. The legend was solidifying. The first real test came in late 1976. A Czech chemist, Dr. Pavel Novak, who possessed vital information on Soviet chemical weapons research, had signaled his handler he was ready to defect. He was hot, and the STB was watching him. A diplomatic car was impossible. Hartmann was routed through Prague, ostensibly to pick up a load of Bohemian crystal. The pickup was coordinated by Vance's team. Novak was instructed to wait at a specific rural lay-by outside Brno at O2 Wara. Hartmann, having already passed Czech customs inbound, pulled over to check his tires. Novak emerged from the woods. The entire process took 90 seconds. Hartmann slid under the trailer, unbolted the chassis panel, and Novak climbed into the coffin. Hartmann secured the panel and drove on. The tension was at the Czech-Austrian border at Drossenhofen. The guard was sleepy. He glanced at the manifest, Bohemian Crystal, and at the seal on the truck, which Hartmann had legitimately received in Prague. He checked Hartmann's passport. He waved him through. 6 hours later, Klaus Hartmann pulled into a secure U.S. facility outside Salzburg. Dr. Novak was extracted, pale and cramping, but safe. Trans-Adriatic haulage was operational. The success of the Novak extraction changed the calculus for Vienna Station. TA was no longer a contingency plan. It was the primary asset for exfiltration and infiltration. Over the next year, TA moved 3 more high-value assets out of the bloc. It also moved in materials deemed too sensitive for the diplomatic pouch, specialized radio equipment, gold coins for agent payments, and high-grade forgery equipment. Klaus Hartmann proved his worth. He was unflappable. On one run, a GDR Volkspolizei officer insisted on searching his empty trailer. Hartmann obliged, opening the doors to show an empty space, knowing the coffin below the floor was occupied by an East German physicist. The operational focus, however, was always Rosinski in Gdansk. He was the linchpin. His position in the Polish Trade Ministry allowed him to clean the manifests, but he was also the CIA's best source on the economic vulnerabilities of the Polish state. The Gdansk shipyards were a hotbed of labor unrest, and Rosinski's data provided Langley with unparalleled insight into the regime's weaknesses. But Rosinski was becoming compromised. In the spring of 1977, the Polish Służba Bezpieczeństwa, SB, the Internal Security Service, began a quiet corruption investigation within the Trade Ministry. The SB had noticed that certain Western firms seemed to have an unusually easy time with customs. Rosinski's name was on a preliminary list. He signaled to Vance using a prearranged coded phrase in a trade telex that he needed extraction. This set the stage for the operation's most dangerous test. Rosinski was not just a man, he was an archive. He had been photographing documents for 2 years. He had nearly 4,000 frames of microfilm detailing Polish trade deficits, Soviet subsidy levels, and, most critically, the SB's own network of informants within the shipping industry. This was the package TA had to retrieve. The plan was complex. Hartmann would drive his TAH truck to Gdansk, carrying a legitimate load of Italian tractor parts. He would clear inbound customs, relying on Rosinski's final act of assistance. He would then proceed to the Gdansk shipyard warehouse to unload. During the unloading process, Rosinski would stage a customs check, taking the truck to a separate secure bay. There, he would transfer the microfilm and himself into the coffin. Hartmann would then seal the compartment, proceed to his outbound customs check, and drive to the west. The risk was enormous. Rosinski would be vanishing from his place of work in the middle of the day. The window between his disappearance and the SB being alerted would be a matter of hours, perhaps minutes. In East Berlin, at the Stasi, Ministry for State Security headquarters in Normannenstrasse, Major Dieter Vogel was not concerned with Polish corruption. Vogel was Hauptabteilung II, counterintelligence. He was a pale, meticulous man who believed ideology was a tool for the masses, but data was the tool for the state. Vogel was tracking a different problem, an anomalous signal loss from several low-level assets in the West German logistics industry. He suspected a new, efficient CIA exfiltration route, but he had no proof. Vogel did not believe in coincidence. He believed in patterns. He requested traffic analyses from allied services, including the Polish SB. He was looking for anomalies in cross-border freight. The SB, in turn, shared their own customs data, hoping the Stasi could spot something they had missed in their corruption probe. Vogel's analysts fed the data into their mainframe computers. They were looking for singleton drivers, companies with only 1 or 2 trucks that ran regular deep block routes. Trans-Adriatic haulage appeared. Vogel noted the name. An Italian firm, based in Trieste. 2 trucks. Primary driver, Klaus Hartmann, West German. On its own, TAH was unremarkable, but Vogel cross-referenced TAH's manifests with known windows of interest, the dates when high-profile traitors, defectors, had vanished. Dr. Pavel Novak, Czech chemist, vanished October 1976. TAH truck was in Prague the same day. Anomaly 1. Rector, GDR physicist, vanished April 1977. TAH truck was in East Berlin 2 days prior. Anomaly 2. The Warsaw couple, Polish intelligence officers, vanished July 1977. TAH truck was in Warsaw. Anomaly 3. It was a pattern. Vogel looked closer at TAH's manifests. They were too clean. The cargo was always low value, machine parts, medical supplies, textiles. The company declared minimal profits. Why would a firm operate such long, expensive routes for such low returns? Vogel theorized the cargo was not the purpose of the trip. The cargo was the cover. He requested surveillance. But TA was based in Italy. He couldn't touch it there. He had to wait for Hartmann to enter his territory. He put a flag on Hartmann's name at all GDR border crossings. Detain for H2, counterintelligence interview upon entry. Do not alarm. Simultaneously, Vogel sent a liaison to the Polish SB in Warsaw, asking about their corruption probe. He was interested in the name that kept appearing on TAH's approved manifests, Marek Rosinski. Vogel began to suspect the corruption was a cover for something far more serious. The Polish SB, protective of their own investigation, resisted Stasi interference. This bureaucratic friction gave Vance and Rosinski a few more critical days. On August 10, 1977, Klaus Hartmann crossed the GDR Polish border at Forst. He was nervous. The GDR guards had been polite, but they had held him for an hour, citing a new computer system. Hartmann knew this was a lie. He was being flagged. He signaled Vienna from a payphone using a simple code, delivery delayed by 1 day, letting Vance know the operation was compromised. Vance had a decision to make: abort the mission, and Rosinski would be captured within a week. Proceed, and Hartmann might be driving into a trap. Langley's cable was clear. Asset Gull is priority 1. Proceed at driver discretion. Vance relayed the message. Hartmann, sitting in a truck stop cafeteria eating sausage, made his decision. He would proceed. He arrived at the Gdansk shipyard on August 11th. The air was thick with salt and welding smoke. Rosinski was waiting for him, his face visibly strained. The corruption investigation had accelerated. The SB had frozen his bank account that morning. "They are here," Rosinski whispered to Hartmann, referring to the SB. "They are watching the main gate." The plan had to change. They could not use the secure loading bay. Hartmann began to unload his legitimate cargo of tractor parts, stall for time. Rosinski, meanwhile, used his authority to requisition a forklift. He stacked several large empty crates near Hartmann's burliette, creating a visual barrier. The confrontation was not cinematic, it was pathetic. A low-level SB agent, a young man named Janik, who had been tasked with simply watching Rosinski, saw the irregular activity with the forklift. He approached, not with a weapon drawn, but with a clipboard. "Minister Rosinski, what is the meaning of this? This truck is not scheduled for inspection here," Janik said, his voice hesitant but official. Rosinski tried to bluff. "This is a priority shipment, state security matter. Your clearance is not high enough." Janik was not intimidated. He knew Rosinski was the subject of the investigation, not the leader of it. "I must insist you stop, sir. I have to call my superior." Janik turned and walked briskly toward the dock office phone. Rosinski looked at Hartmann. They had perhaps 2 minutes. "Now, Klaus. Now." Hartmann didn't hesitate. He slid under the trailer, wrenching the bolts on the coffin's access panel. Rosinski, clutching a small briefcase of microfilm, scrambled under the truck and pulled himself into the dark compartment. It was a tight fit. "Do not make a sound, Marek," Hartmann said, his voice flat. "No matter what." He slammed the panel shut and began tightening the bolts. He was only halfway done when he heard shouting. Janik was returning, this time with 2 militia officers. Hartmann calmly slid out, wiping grease on his overalls. "Problems, officers?" he asked in his rough German-accented Polish. "You are not to move this vehicle," one of the militia men said, resting his hand on his holster. "We must wait for the customs inspector." "I am already late," Hartmann complained, stalling. "My manifest is clear." "Wait." Hartmann knew the truck could not stand a thorough inspection. The bolts on the access panel were not fully secured. He had one advantage. The militia and the SB agent were waiting for a customs inspector. They were following procedure. They did not yet know they were dealing with an espionage case. Hartmann climbed into his cab. "I will wait, but I am moving my truck out of the loading bay. It is blocking traffic." The militia officer hesitated. It seemed reasonable. "Move it over there," he said, pointing to a gravel patch 50 meters away. "And stay in the cab." Hartmann started the engine, the diesel roar covering the sound of his heart. He put the truck in gear, moved the 50 meters, and then he kept going. He slowly accelerated past the astonished officer, turning toward the main shipyard gate. The militia officers, realizing the bluff, sprinted for their own vehicle. The chase had begun. Hartmann knew he could not outrun them. His only chance was to lose them in the industrial sprawl of Gdansk and get onto the main E81 highway south before a general alert was issued. The militia car, a Polish Fiat, was fast, but Hartmann's massive truck blocked the narrow dock roads. He forced the pursuing car into a dead end, then swung the burliette onto the main road, heading south toward Lodz. He knew every major border crossing would be alerted within the hour. His name, his truck, and his license plate would be on every list. He had to assume Rosinski was already identified as the missing package. In Vienna, Vance was blind. Hartman had missed his second check-in. The operation was in the wind. Hartman drove for 14 hours straight, fueled by amphetamines and black coffee. He bypassed the main checkpoints, using rural roads he had memorized during his dry runs. He was aiming for the GDR. The Polish SB was efficient, but the Stasi was a different entity. He gambled that the SB's alert would be slow to cross the border, delayed by interagency rivalry. He reached the Polish GDR border near Szczecin. The guards there were looking for a truck fleeing Poland, not entering the GDR. His TAH manifest, showing a route from Poland to East Berlin, was unusual, but not technically illegal. The Polish guard, reading a bulletin about a missing truck heading west, waved Hartman east into the GDR, believing him to be unrelated. Hartman was now in the territory of Major Dieter Vogel. Vogel, in East Berlin, received the flash traffic from Gdansk. Rosinski had vanished. The TAH truck had broken containment. Vogel knew instantly this was the network he had been hunting. He also knew Hartman was not an amateur. He would not drive to Helmstedt, the main West German crossing. He would try a quieter crossing, perhaps Druitz or Marienborn. Vogel issued a single directive to all GDR crossings: detain TAH, driver is CIA, asset is human, use maximum security. Hartman was exhausted. Rosinski had been in the coffin for nearly 20 hours. The air ventilation was failing. Hartman was driving toward the Druitz crossing, the main transit point to West Berlin. It was a gamble. He hoped the sheer volume of traffic would provide cover. He pulled into the checkpoint at Orforia. The atmosphere was immediately wrong. It was too bright, too quiet. The usual bored border guards were replaced by stern men in Stasi uniforms. Klaus Hartman, a Stasi officer, read from his passport. Pull your vehicle into Bay 4 for a full customs inspection. I have machine parts. Hartman protested weakly. The seals are intact. Bay 4, Herr Hartman. Hartman knew it was over. He cut the engine. As he stepped down from the cab, 2 officers flanked him. You will come with us. Your papers are not in order. This was the arrest. It was quiet, bureaucratic, and final. They led him away from the truck. A separate team, Vogel's team, immediately surrounded the Berliet truck. They didn't bother with the cargo doors. They rolled mechanics' creepers underneath and went straight for the chassis. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Klaus Hartman was not taken to a police station. He was flown to East Berlin and driven to the Stasi Remand prison at Hohenschönhausen. The interrogation began immediately. Major Vogel conducted it personally. The room was painted a pale, sickening green. Hartman was seated on a stool, the bolts exposed. Vogel was polite. He offered Hartman a cigarette, which Hartman refused. The operation is over, Klaus, Vogel said, opening a file. We have Herr Rosinski. He is talking. We have the microfilm. We have the truck. This was the first part of the psychological assault. Hopelessness. I am a truck driver, Hartman said. I transport freight. You transport people. You work for Arthur Vance at the Vienna station. The company Trans-Adriatic Haulage is a CIA proprietary. You are LTL-1. We know all of this. Vogel was guessing, but his guesses were educated. Hartman's face remained impassive. The interrogation was relentless, but it adhered to the restrictions of the system. They did not lay a hand on him. Instead, they used time. Hartman was subjected to sleep deprivation, kept awake for 48 hours. The questions were repeated, always the same. Who is your contact in Warsaw? What are the radio codes? What are the other routes? When Hartman remained silent, Vogel changed tactics. He brought in a tape recorder. He played the sound of a man weeping. This is Herr Rosinski. He is very disappointed in you. He thought you were a professional. He is telling us everything to save his family. Hartman did not know if the tape was real. He focused on his training. Say nothing. Admit nothing. Marek Rosinski was not in Hohenschönhausen. He had been handed back to the Polish SB. His interrogation was different. He was a traitor. His trial was swift. In a closed military court in Warsaw, he was presented as evidence of Western moral decay. The state prosecutor condemned him not just for espionage, but for betraying the economic trust of the Polish people. His motivations, his children's future, his disillusionment were irrelevant. He was found guilty and removed from public life, sentenced to a term of hard labor from which few returned. Hartmann's trial in the GDR was equally a formality. As a West German national, he was a political pawn. He was found guilty of state-sponsored human trafficking and espionage. He was sentenced to 25 years. Vogel watched from the back of the courtroom. He had his man. He had the truck. He had neutralized the TAH network. The silence from Hartmann and Rosinski was definitive. In Vienna, Arthur Vance initiated the burn notice. All assets connected to TAH were liquidated. The office in Trieste was emptied overnight. The second Berliet truck, which had been in Austria, was repainted and sold for scrap. Operation LTL was terminated. The personal tragedy element was immediate. In Gdansk, Marek Rosinski's wife was detained by the SB. She was interrogated for weeks, though she knew nothing of his activities. She lost her job as a teacher. Their children were expelled from their schools, their futures erased by their father's crimes. They became pariahs, watched 24/7 by the state. In West Germany, Hartmann's ex-wife received a notification that he had been detained in the GDR. The West German government made a formal protest, which was ignored. Hartmann, the individual, was lost to the system. Vance, in his Vienna office, wrote the final report. The operation was classified as a catastrophic failure. Langley was furious, not about the human cost, but about the loss of the mechanism. The most reliable exfiltration route into the northern tier of the Warsaw Pact was gone. Vogel, meanwhile, received a promotion. He had dissected the TAH Berliet truck. The coffin was a revelation to Stasi engineers. They photographed it, studied it, and issued alerts to all border guards, teaching them to look for non-factory chassis modifications. Vogel had closed the door, but the victory was hollow. He knew the CIA would already be developing a new method. The paranoia of the counterintelligence officer was that victory was never final. It was merely a pause in the game. Years passed. The Cold War entered its final frigid decade. Marek Rosinski was never heard from again. He became a non-person, a file in a Warsaw archive. His family, after years of harassment, was eventually allowed to emigrate to Sweden in 1984, stripped of their Polish citizenship. In 1985, as part of a large-scale East-West exchange of intelligence assets on the Glinica Bridge, Klaus Hartmann's name was on the list. The CIA had traded a captured Soviet illegal living in New York for 3 low-level agents and Hartmann. Hartmann, then 67, walked across the bridge. He was gaunt, his hair white, and he had not spoken in 2 years. He was debriefed by the CIA in a facility in the Taunus Mountains. He provided no new intelligence. The interrogation methods had broken his spirit, but not his training. He had confirmed nothing to Vogel. He had given Vance and the network the time they needed to scatter. He was given a pension and retired to a small apartment in Bavaria, where he lived out his days in silence, watching the news. Arthur Vance retired from the agency in 1981. He moved to a quiet house in Northern Virginia. He never spoke of TAH, even to his family. The failure of the operation and the loss of Rosinski weighed on him. He viewed it as a personal, logistical error. He had pushed the legend too hard, run it too many times. Dieter Vogel, the Stasi major, rose to the rank of colonel. He was a true believer in the scientific socialist state. When the Berlin Wall fell in 1989, his world disintegrated. He was dismissed from the Stasi and found himself a citizen of a country he despised. In the 1990s, he was briefly investigated for his role in the security services, but the charges were dropped. He died of a heart attack in 1998, an irrelevant man in a unified Germany. The history of trans-Adriatic haulage is not one of dramatic action. It is a case study in the bureaucratic nature of espionage. The fake shipping company was a perfect tool for the Cold War, an era defined by dual realities. TAH existed in the gray space between legitimate commerce and clandestine warfare. In reflection, the moral ambiguity of the operation is stark. Arthur Vance used Rosinski, promising him freedom while extracting state secrets. Dieter Vogel hunted them, driven by ideological purity but employing methods of psychological destruction. Klaus Hartmann was the fulcrum, a man motivated by money who ultimately paid a price in time and spirit. The TAH operation was, for a brief time, a resounding success. It moved 17 people and countless materials that significantly impacted the West's understanding of the Soviet Bloc. But its failure demonstrates the fundamental flaw of such operations. They rely on human beings, and human beings are fallible. The entire multi-million-dollar network was compromised not by a super spy, but by a low-level informant at the Gdansk docks and an analyst in East Berlin who was good at spotting patterns. The coffin built into the Berlier truck serves as the operation's central metaphor. It was a hollow space, disguised by the mundane, designed to move human life across a hostile frontier. But like the system that built it, it was cold, dark, and isolating. The legacy of TH is not a story of triumph, but a quiet record of the immense, unseen logistical efforts of the Cold War and the profound personal tragedies absorbed by the individuals caught within the machinery of the state. Thank you for joining us for this analysis. If you found this story compelling, please consider subscribing for more content.